As Bitcoin has continued to grow in popularity and size, the network's ecosystem has also continued to multiply. Bitcoin has led the charge in the entrance of institutional cash into cryptocurrency, as well as the development of regulatory and tech infrastructure for crypto. It's grown so quickly that it's almost easy to forget that just a few short years ago, Bitcoin was facing an identity crisis so powerful that much of the world was confused about which coin was the real Bitcoin. Remember Bitcoin Cash? Of course you do. The Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash crisis is firmly in Bitcoin's rearview mirror. However, the underlying problems in Bitcoin's governance that caused the crisis in the first place haven't really changed. While this isn't a serious issue for Bitcoin at the moment, Bitcoin could face governance issues on the road ahead. Finance magnates recently sat down with Jake Yocom-Piatt to speak about governance on Bitcoin and on Decred, the cryptocurrency that he helped to create. Jake is currently the project lead of the Decred cryptocurrency project, as well as the chief executive of Company Zero, LLC, which is one of the corporate contractors that works for Decred. In addition to governance, we also spoke about Decred's evolution and about how blockchain can bring transparency to government elections. I'm Rachel McIntosh, and this is FMTV. Hello, Jake. Welcome to FMTV. Such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. I know I've had the pleasure of interacting with you and your publication for a bit. So it's nice to finally see your face.
Yeah, definitely. Nice to hear your voice. So, yes, I know a little bit about you, but for people who might not know about who you are, can you just briefly talk a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
For sure. So my name's Jake Yocom-Piatt. I am the project lead for the Decred cryptocurrency project. I'm also the CEO of one of the corporate contractors who works for the project, Company Zero LLC. And I've been working in the cryptocurrency space since basically late 2012, early 2013. And my background started with Bitcoin, which was sort of the soup du jour of 2012 or 2013, and that really caught my eye. And so I started working on it because I thought it was very interesting to be able to store and transfer value outside of the fiat banking system. So that drew me in, and sort of from there I built out some infrastructure in the context of an alternative full node Bitcoin implementation called BTC Suite, where the intention there was to make the ecosystem in the Bitcoin space more diverse, and to just do it again to make it more stable and more secure. And so we did that for a while, but it became sort of a thankless endeavor. I'd spent a couple $1 million doing that, and it was just it was a financing game. So I can only do that for so long before eventually I have to get external investment, and that didn't really appeal to me. So I decided to create a cryptocurrency with some other people that I knew.
And thus Decred was born, I guess.
Yeah. And Decred was really born out of the frustrations that I had with my Bitcoin experiences. That Bitcoin's obviously very interesting technology, and it really sort of changes the game. This idea that you don't have a central point of trust that determines the outcome of how the value storage and transfer game works was very interesting to me. But there were a couple major issues I saw after doing that for a couple of years, and one of them was that when it comes to who's really in charge of the network, is Bitcoin, it's really the core developers and then a handful of more or less economic nodes, these big venture capital backed outfits that build the infrastructure around it. And so and that was an issue to me, because it's like, shouldn't the people who actually hold the Bitcoin be in control of the network? And that's really not how. A combination of miners, venture capitalists, and then and developers. And I thought that we really needed to formalize that. So what we did is we added a proof of stake element to Decred to address that. The other issues that I saw were around things like I mentioned earlier that I spent a couple $1 million working on Bitcoin and building out that infrastructure. And it becomes a tragedy of the commons pretty quickly, because you go, okay, well, who's going to pay for all this? And it's like, is going to pay for it, and where that ends and how that ends is a real open question to me. And so I saw that the way we can address that is if 10% of every block subsidy goes into a treasury account, and then we use that treasury account to pay for the work that's being done on the project, that allows us to get away from this model where you have to have, wealthy benefactors or, venture capitalists come in and invest in someone who's doing this work. So that the network, in effect, is investing in itself. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing, that I noticed was that Bitcoin, while great technology, was, had stagnation issues. It would get stuck in the sense that, oh, everyone's arguing about the block size. I mean, the whole thing practically ground to a halt because of people arguing about block size. Right. And, and we have a way to resolve these issues where people are effectively voting with the coins that they've staked. So that's what really sort of got me to Decred, and that's really what Decred brought to the table when it first launched.
Right. So it was, a network that was sort of more focused on the users and governance and, sort of, yeah, as you said, this longstanding problem that Bitcoin has had where people can't really make changes to Bitcoin because no one can really seem to agree on what Bitcoin is. And that hasn't come up in a couple of years. But I mean, certainly we can expect that Bitcoin might run into some of those problems in the future.
Yeah, I mean, just recently they've been having issues with the Taproot upgrade, because what they're trying to do, right, is they're trying to change the consensus rules to add, this Taproot functionality, and it's obviously useful functionality, but then it's this question of, well, how do we stage this? How do we do this? Do we make it so that miners can block it? If miners do block it, do we do a user-activated soft fork? There's a whole bunch of, nitty-gritty details about that governance process that are just so much more orderly in the context of Decred, where the people who have staked the coins to participate in the network on the, in the long, to actually vote on this stuff. So it's not, oh, I'm not, we're going to have to use some Sybil attackable signaling mechanism like user activated soft forks. Instead, what we'll do is we'll just vote on it, which is really, fundamentally how proof of work works anyway, except we do it with proof of stake.
Right. Okay. So Decred has been around since 2016, which is kind of like, in the world of crypto, because everything moves so quickly, is actually quite a long time. So I'm curious, I have many questions for you, based on this, this 5 years that you've spent in this space, or more than that actually. But how has Decred, sort of evolved from this project that you were part of building into what it is today? How have you guys managed to attract and keep users in the network? What are the use cases? How have they grown over the years? Talk to me. Tell me a little bit about that.
I think in terms of the evolution, I mean, when we launched back in February 2016, we launched with the expectation that our coin would be worth, I don't know, 50 cents. And then we were like, man, it would be really cool if it was worth like a few dollars, or maybe like a $10 or whatever. Yeah. And then over time, it's like, wow, this thing went absolutely, gangbusters in 2017. And so, the bull market of 2017 was really exciting. And in order to, keep moving the peg forward, I mean, a lot of projects really focus on things like marketing and partnerships and, sort of sales and positioning. And we, admittedly, we do almost none of that. That is, that instead of focusing on the sales and marketing side so much, we end up focusing on more the development and milestone side. So instead of going, oh, we have a partnership with big corporation X, what we do is we add major new feature set X. And some of the features that we've added along the way include things like voting on consensus changes. When we launched, we had a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake consensus system, but that was sort of the foundation for the ability to then go, hey, let's take a major decision like a consensus change, and instead of just arguing about it, or for example, having the developer or maybe venture capitalists make the decisions, let's all make the decision together in a way that's secure, so that you can't just, I don't know, spin up 10,000 nodes on Amazon, and do that in a way so that we can all evolve together in a way that we agree upon, as opposed to, bicker endlessly about block size or whatever. And that process, that started in 2017. So we fixed some of our own internal problems, like a ticket price algorithm that didn't work. And then there's a number of other things that we fixed along the way, like we added the ability to, to use the Lightning Network. We had to do a consensus change for that. We've just recently, and it's actually going on right now, to vote for a decentralized treasury. So instead of the treasury being something that's controlled by a single person, or a single corporate entity.
Mhm.
It is now it's a special account on our network that's controlled by the stakeholders in the same way that voting for the consensus rules works. So that's
Wow.
something now. And we have a whole bunch more of these things planned in the future. That is, smallish changes to consensus that allow us to do, useful stuff and move the peg forward. So for example, in the context of Taproot and Bitcoin, we could take that, put that up as a consensus change and activate that in about 4 months. And that's really what's held us together for so long. The other component here that we find really useful in terms of users is just that there's a lot of people who think that Bitcoin is very interesting and it's a very good investment. But then when people, wow, this sounds like an even better idea, even if you guys don't have the same sort of massive network effect that Bitcoin does.
Mhm.
So in a way, it's a way for people to diversify from being just Bitcoin holders. We actually have a lot of people who are only Bitcoin and Decred holders. So sometimes it's a little bit of a tightrope to walk. I don't want to offend anybody by saying speaking to, but at the same time, it is our bread and butter. So by keeping in the spirit of Bitcoin originally, we've managed to sort of hold the attention of a number of older OG Bitcoin investors. So that's one of the ways that we keep going. And then you mentioned the use case. I think that was the last thing that you had mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think something that's really challenging in the space is that everybody wants to have, everybody wants their coin to be the coin for X. I refer to that as an app coin because it doesn't really have a real, there's no real reason for it to exist. It's a coin for this thing. It's like, why not use Bitcoin or why not use Decred?
Right.
And so we stayed away from that. We're trying to create a better form of money. And the place that everyone pretty much has to start, and this includes Bitcoin, is it has to start as a store of value.
Mhm.
Before it can become a medium of exchange or a unit of account, it almost always has to be a store of value. And I mean, even Bitcoin right now is more of a store of value than anything else. So that's
Right.
sort of, we're aiming to emulate some components of that.
So I'm curious, you mentioned that some of the Decred holders are people who sort of are like maybe OG crypto people who only hold Bitcoin and Decred. But do you know anything else about the people who are actually using Decred? I mean, is it sort of, are there any trends that you've noticed in like geographical lines, other kind of demographics? What do you know about the users?
Well, I think that what I can speak to most confidently is, for example, the people that I work with, is that there's a bunch of contractors who work on the project. Our contractors are pretty spread out. There's a chunk of us in the U.S. There are some of us are in Africa, South America, Europe. We're pretty thin on the Asian side, but in terms of pretty much everywhere else, we got people from India. We've got people from other all kinds of places. In terms of a little difficult to tell. I mean, I feel like that's one of the challenges of cryptocurrency is to determine exactly who's using it. It's almost like, isn't that part of hiding that is part of the part of the point of
Mm-hmm.
cryptocurrency in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that it's like, okay, there's these transactions. In terms of integrations, we don't have a huge number of big integrations, but a number of the people that are interested in our project are from both the northern and southern America. So we have a big following sort of in Brazil and then in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico as well. So we actually have a lot of action sort of in our hemisphere. But in terms of who exactly the users are, it's hard to say. And in terms of use cases, I mean, something that that's also recent that I had forgotten to mention earlier is that we added privacy support in, I think it was August of 2019. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been like a year and a half since we launched that, and we just recently added that to our graphical wallet. And we went from roughly 28% of our of all of the coins in circulation being mixed. That now is up at 42% last I checked. So we've actually had a big uptick in usage, particularly in the context of mixing and and privacy. So what we've while it wasn't really the intent to be a privacy coin at launch, we've sort of ended up going that route because we see privacy as such an important component of fungibility. So if your coins aren't private, how fungible are they really? So I feel like a lot of other people seem to be catching on and working to make their coins, make their their holdings more private. Engagement on that front in terms of usage.
Right, absolutely. And I'm happy that you mentioned Brazil because something really cool happened in November of last year, which is that Brazil implemented Decred's blockchain for the 2020 municipal elections there. So can you talk a little bit about that process? How did you sort of, did the Brazilian government reach out to Decred in order to get this going, or how did that happen?
Well, what we have is we have a couple pieces of software that are, they're open source, so anybody can use them, and you can use them effectively for free, apart from the time it takes to set them up. So the two things involved are, there's a system called Politeia, which is it's a system for taking cryptographic attestation. So you go, hey, I'm person X. I said, I said thing Y at time Z, and then you can take that information and anchor it in the Decred blockchain in
Right.
a way that you can prove that on or before that time, a certain person who's attesting did a certain thing at a certain time, and that's so that's called Politeia, and then the part where it anchors it into our blockchain is called DCR time. What has ended up happening is that there's been a number of people in Brazil specifically who have been involved with I think it's Voto Legal was the one that did the municipal election checking, and then there's a notary, it's Original My, and what they both effectively do is they allow you to notarize data. So if somebody signs some digital document, they can take a hash of that document and then anchor that into the Decred blockchain in a way that you can prove. Similarly, when people donate money in these municipal elections, the person who received it can say, I received this money, and then effectively notarize it and anchor it into our blockchain. And that's next. So that what it does is it creates effectively unforgeable historical records for effectively zero cost and without bloating our blockchain at all. It's just a hash, and these things get anchored, once an hour or once every 30 minutes. So this sort of attestation process allows people to be confident that there's not shenanigans going on when it comes to donations, which apparently I would guess, based on the fact that they're doing it in Brazil, it's a noteworthy problem there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I remember speaking to a citizen of Brazil and a native Brazilian native, and he talked about sort of the importance of blockchain in terms of what it could do to end political corruption. So it's really cool to see that happening in real time. It's sort of something that people have been talking about for quite a while, I think, but there haven't been so many examples of it actually happening.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about implementations, particularly when it comes to politics, is that once politics are involved, there's always these competing interests. Like, for example, you'd figure people would want fairer elections in most places all over the world, but do they really? I mean, you look at the gerrymandering, in the United States, and you look at the shapes of some of these districts, and it's like, listen, if people wanted a fair vote, they wouldn't shape their districts like a
Mhm.
snake that snakes across the state.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's just it's exciting to see something like this happening in Brazil because it's like the technology to make something like an election truly fair exists. That's what blockchain. That blockchain can do this, but it's just not something that we really see being used. Do you think that there is any chance? We've seen this is kind of a wild question here, but we've seen all across the world, the digital yuan, the digital rupee, talk about the digital dollar, the digital euro, et cetera, et cetera. But we haven't seen maybe as many, or at least not as high profile conversations about how blockchain technology can be used for, you know, governance. I mean, is that something that you see happening or, sort of entering the conversation in a more serious way within the foreseeable future?
Hey, I'm a hopeful person when it comes to more fairness and more transparency in the context of governance and and voting for people. I think that's great. I mean, that's really how Decred works, and part of the reason why we ran with this ball is because it's a great idea. There should be more transparency, and it should be harder to cast fake votes. It's effectively impossible in Decred, so we engineered it out from zero. But we'd love to see that, more of that engineered into, the nation state voting processes in the world around us. Now,
Hmm.
whether people choose to run the ball there or not is really an open question per the competing interests that people have. But I do think things, particularly after how heated things got in this 2020 election cycle, I think that it would be great to see these kinds of things implemented in the United States. And I think that there's a real need for it, but it comes down to a question of, are people willing to, be like, I want to be honest and I want to be fair and I want to do it in a way that basically even my team can't cheat. And I feel like that's the real kicker when it comes to this kind of, neutrality or balance, is that not a lot of people have the discipline to go, listen, I might lose this election by implementing a fair voting system, but I should do it on principle, right? So there's going to be a lot of people who are like, oh man, no, we normally fudge the numbers by 2%. We can't we can't let this system get deployed. So, but on the flip side, I mean, there's people hopping mad all over the United States. So it's like, I think a fairer system would really go a long way to resolving disputes like that and really, bringing people together. But whether it can overcome the sort of, the momentum of the existing rigged systems that we see around us, I mean, it's an open question. It's hard to say what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, very, very well said. And what I hope that, what I love about the cryptocurrency space sort of as a whole is that I think a lot of thought leaders and developers in the space are just building the new thing. It's like the old thing is so dysfunctional that it will fall apart on its own eventually. And then when it does, like, the new thing will be there. So hopefully we can see something like that with voting or governance.
Yeah, I mean that was the easiest way for us to implement it. We could try to implement it for everybody in the United States. One of the things that I think, that I've really learned from working on both Bitcoin and Decred is that incentive alignment is a very powerful tool. And in both cases, the incentives are aligned. So with Bitcoin, your incentives are aligned so that you mine it and it's secure. It's not so great once you start getting into the make a decision as a group part, right?
Right.
Proof of work is not a great way to make decisions because it's a very centralized thing. But then you move to proof of stake, and then you can align interests in a way. For example, everyone who votes gets paid a voting reward. With Decred, you can't exactly do that with a nation state. So it's like it's more challenging in some ways because the incentive alignment components of Bitcoin and Decred allow you to do things that otherwise, I mean, most people would be like voting cryptographically and locking your funds and getting a ticket in a lottery. It's like, that sounds too complicated. But then when you go, but you get paid, people are like, okay, I'll do that. That sounds more fun. I get paid, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the challenge with nation states is that they can't really do that. So that really key incentive alignment is not there. And then I mean the other thing that always happens with when you vote for people, like a sort of in a way democracy or the republic in the U.S. is almost like a delegated proof of stake system, right? Where we all vote for one person to vote on our behalf. And the incentives of people like that are very, very misaligned. They're very incentivized to get your votes and then very incentivized to ignore you once they get your votes. So it's like they get your votes and they're like, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to do A, B, and C. And then they're like, oh no, I'm actually going to do D, E, and F for the people who funded my campaign.
Oh my God.
And that's,
yeah.
and so incentive alignment really matters. And that's one of the reasons why I think, has so many problems is because it lacks those, the same ability to engineer incentives that we have with blockchains.
Okay, amazing. I love talking about this, but I want to ask you a few more questions while we still have time. So I want to switch gears a moment to talk a little bit about Bitcoin, and I really like what you said at the earlier at the beginning of this interview, which was just that about Bitcoin's sort of like funding model, that a lot of the both the investors in Bitcoin itself and also in the Bitcoin ecosystem, it has become sort of like very corporate in a way. And on the one hand, that's been a very exciting and good thing for cryptocurrency as a whole. It's brought a lot more interest to the space, more retail investors, more institutional investors. But I want to see, taking the long view with Bitcoin, seeing it become sort of this very corporate institutional thing. What do you think that really means for cryptocurrency as a whole and for Bitcoin? I mean, will Bitcoin, become sort of a tool of quote unquote the man, for lack of a better term, or where is that going?
Well, I think this is a complex issue and a complex question. So I'll try to keep it brief. Let's see.
Sure,
So
sure.
I think the first thing that I think is important to acknowledge about the United States is that it really is a corporatocracy. Large corporations and their lobbying dollars are hugely important to the way the U.S. government works and the way legislation in the United States works. Correspondingly, they have they're effectively in charge of the U.S. government. And when it comes down to who has to buy into Bitcoin to really fully legitimize it in the United States, it's corporations, and that's just based on the fact that the U.S. is a corporatocracy. So if the corporations don't buy into the work that you're doing, to some extent, it's perceived as not legitimate.
Right.
In terms of where it's going from here, and in terms of surveillance and all of that, is the dystopian hellscape of your washing machine spying on you, and your dishwasher recording your audio in your kitchen. I mean, that's the unfortunate reality of networks, which is that networks have a way of sucking up more information than they should. And I think that in terms of it becoming a tool of Big Brother or the establishment, in some ways it already has become that. And I mean, one of the ways it's done that is that there's no real meaningful privacy on the Bitcoin blockchain. It's notoriously hard to get privacy, and then even when via Wasabi wallet or a similar mixing service, the issue is that those coins, in many cases, particularly at KYC AML exchanges, are then blacklisted or gray listed to some extent. Right. So just because you mix your coins, so you have on-chain privacy, will sometimes mean, oh, you want to exchange those for US dollars? Nope, we're actually going to freeze your coins that you deposited, or no, those aren't allowed. So that issues come up, or you have to withdraw these coins. We can't allow you to exchange them. That kind of thing. So in the longer term, I think that something that Bitcoin is missing, that is pretty much, in my view, a requirement for for the system being long-term sustainable, is this privacy that it lacks. And then, as a function of corporate buy-in, now adding that privacy even back in 2012 or 2013 was a bit kind of shaky. It's going to put you on shaky ground with the corporate types. If you try to add it now, I mean, you might lose that corporate rubber stamp of approval that you currently have. Mm-hmm. So Bitcoin's in a bit of a challenging, continuing to advance in terms of its market capitalization and its market price relative to hey, is this going to be long-term sustainable? I mean, I don't know how much you or any of your listeners have read about the incentives, but there's I forget the name of the author, but someone had written a couple articles about how even a small number of like 10% of the miners starting to force, basically do KYC AML or basically not include mixing transactions into blocks, can lead to basically corporate or potentially nation state level censorship of Bitcoin. So there's a number of issues with Bitcoin that I see coming up. And my hope is that I have the luxury of not being the kid who's kind of like late to the game, but I have the luxury of going, oh, look at what's happened to those other people who were playing in the game before me. And that's something that I always try to do with Bitcoin, which is that Bitcoin is cutting its own as issues arise. I have to sort of adapt and try to adapt to what they see in a way that I hope I can continue to do that.
Right, absolutely. And I want to also ask you, sort of switching gears again to another sort of broader trend in the cryptocurrency world right now, is there's a kind of a couple of important things that are happening in the DeFi space. And one of them is, this idea of which chain is going to be the chain of the DeFi space. So Bitcoin is kind of like officially like crypto's, big store of value, and it's kind of going in this very corporate direction. Then we have on the DeFi world, there's, sort of Ethereum versus the Binance Smart Chain versus Polkadot versus, whatever. Do you think, which direction do you see that going? Do you have any thoughts on that? Just like, will these chains be able to coexist with one another, or is this a zero-sum game, basically?
Now, you're asking about this specifically in the context of what is it, DeFi? You were saying?
Yeah, or just sort of like people talk about, there's this phrase, the backbone of the DeFi ecosystem that that we see, like, on Twitter. I've definitely written it many times as a reporter, in reference to Ethereum or whatever. But do you think that these different networks, that there will be one that's sort of ultimately chosen as like the backbone of the DeFi ecosystem, or do
Well,
you?
so
Yeah.
I, I think that they all have strengths and weaknesses.
Mhm.
First off, I just want to say how incredibly entertained I've been watching the Binance Smart Chain and Ethereum people fight. That's got to be one of the funniest things I've seen in the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So okay, so that really has entertained the hell out of me. But that said, I think from a technological perspective, if we assume that one of the three examples you gave, which is Binance Smart Chain, Ethereum, or Polkadot, is going to win, I got to say that from a technological perspective, I have Polkadot's model. And Polkadot's model is basically that there are parachains that anchor into their dot chain, and that model I think is going to go further than Ethereum or BSC.
Hmm.
And my read there is that it's really a scaling problem. That is, if you go long term, you go, okay, let's assume everybody has some, there's always, people are always issuing new tokens. They want to do automated market making for them using DeFi stuff. Okay, what platform is that going to occur on? Whatever platform that occurs on is going to be molasses slow, because as soon as anybody is trying to do a decentralized exchange fully on chain, that is, the order book, the order book maintenance, the order book placement, the matching, when that's all on chain, everyone's fighting to get their transaction in first, and then it's just sort of it's basically like, take all the churn of a centralized exchange, now put it on a blockchain. And in that process, I think as long as all this stuff lives, for example, Ethereum, there's huge congestion and fee problems that come up. Whereas the parachain model would be like, oh, you can put some of this stuff on a parachain and then basically you take the congestion off of the main network, so that other people can still use the network without it, becoming dog slow. So
Right.
I expect that, I think Polkadot's got a better medium to long-term advantage. It's been really funny to watch the people cutting over to Binance Smart Chain. I find that very funny,
Hmm.
because the Ethereum people really sort of blaze the trail, and they're like, "Hey, come check out this trail I blazed," and the Ethereum people are like, "Hey, that's our trail." And I think that Binance Smart Chain definitely has some legs. It's got momentum going, and whether Ethereum stays on top is a big question mark. It's got a lot of buy-in. A lot of people are interested. There's a lot of venture capital money in it. Um, but it's also incredibly congested, and like the fees are comically high. You can shard the thing. It's not really going to change a whole lot. Sharding is just sort of, for me as an engineer, as soon as you mention sharding database, I'm like, oh man, I wince every time I hear sharding. And
Okay.
so, yeah.
So kind of a tough road ahead maybe for Ethereum there, or just we'll have to see what happens. But I'm curious, where do you see Decred, as we see the DeFi trend develop, as we see Bitcoin, sort of become whatever it's going to become. Where do you see Decred fitting into the cryptocurrency sort of landscape, as well as the global financial landscape, sort of more generally over the next several years?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin has opened the doorway, and there's a lot of people who are starting to question the underlying assumptions that are part of fiat currency. That's obviously a very positive trend. So as much as I have my misgivings about certain things with Bitcoin, it's great for people to start questioning the narrative of a central bank endlessly issuing debt in a way that undermines or debases the value of people's currency and their investment currency.
Hmm.
So this whole process is very positive, and I see Decred is the natural next step past Bitcoin to go, okay, well, we have this great network, we can decentralize the value storage and transmission. What about everything else? What about managing the project? What about making major decisions as a group, like consensus changes?
Hmm.
What about What about financing the, the construction of more infrastructure that we need in order to make the project go? I mean, and a great example of that is the Lightning Network, which is that the Lightning Network has been developed at, substantial expense by, by several different developer groups in the Bitcoin space. But it's like, well, what's to say there isn't going to be another Lightning Network type structure that needs to be built in the future? And it's, it's in some ways it's thankless work. One way to refer to this is as a skinny protocol, right? So a fat protocol would be something that you write and that gets a lot of money and makes you wealthy. But the unfortunate reality is that there's only so many of those out there, and a skinny protocol is something like the Lightning Network, where we really need it to to continue scaling. But the reality is that it's hard to make money doing that. And I'm someone who in the past I worked on things that made no money, and it thankless work, but it's it's something that has to happen. And in order to keep evolving, you need a treasury to do that. And then any provides those funds is going to have issues. So for example, like if you get $100 million of venture capital money, now guess what? The venture capital people are going to want to have a say in what you're doing with that money, how you're spending your time, what you're working. That might not, in fact, it probably won't align with the interests of the network. So all these incentive alignments get out of whack. And I think that I expect in the long run, that's the kind of thing that will appeal about Decred relative to Bitcoin, which is that it's obvious once you've thought about it a little bit and gone, well, who's in charge? How do you pay for stuff? Those kinds of questions will continue to come up in the context of Bitcoin. And when people look for the answer, they'll find Decred.
Awesome. Jake, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been a genuine pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah, it's been, it's been great, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Before we go, can you just quickly tell our listeners where they might be able to find out a little bit more about you and about Decred as a whole?
Of course. We have a website, decred.org, and then we have a number of different chat platforms we're on. You can go to chat.decred.org. And our primary one is Matrix. So if you ever want to message us and ask us questions, or you need help installing software, or or anything else Decred related, you can hit us up on these chat platforms. I think we're on Matrix, Telegram, and I think that's it. Yeah, those are the big ones.
Okay.
So we're on there, and we're available. So if you want to show up and interact, you can do that. We're also on Twitter. So I'm at Behind Text, spelled with those two. And then the project is at Decred Project. So you can catch up with us either on Twitter, social media, or on our chats.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jake.
Thanks for having me. And the revolution will not be centralized.
That's right, baby. I love it. Another day, another Decred. For more news, events, and podcasts like this one, visit financemagnates.com. Thanks for listening.